NSA, CIA, FBI, can they get into my phone?
Yes.
Can they get into my laptop?
Absolutely.
iPad?
Anything, as long as they can dedicate people, money, and time to the target, they can get in.
And what kind of information can they get from my phone, for example?
Everything in your contacts list, every SMS message that you use, every place that's ever been, where the phone is physically located. Even if you've got GPS disabled because they can see which wireless access points are near you, every part of a private life today is found on someone's phone. We used to say a man's home is his castle. Today, a man's phone is his castle.
Privacy matters because we all need a margin of discretion around our lives so that we can exercise some control over them. The fact of the matter is that we've already long ago given up much of our privacy as soon as we started to email and use mobile telephones. But if you thought about what it would be like if your neighbours knew details of your bank account or your medical record or could listen into your quarrels with your spouse, you would be very disconcerted, because you would feel that you were losing control over areas of your life that just belong to you. That's why privacy really matters. And the great worry that we have in the digital age is that we've already given so much of it up, both to private agencies and to public ones.
I think that social media is interesting. Would you stick a picture outside your house? No, probably not. But you are always framed in social media context in a world that you create. You don't have to accept people as your friends. You don't have to let the whole world see it. It's not really anonymous in the way that I think sometimes people get scared that it is. I think this all comes back to education, and it's all very well for me to sit here in my mid to late, can I bear it 30s. Actually, you need to look at what 11, 10, 9, 8-year-olds are doing and how they're interacting with technology. And for me, they're the people that both can teach us, but also need to be educated themselves. And this is where I agree with Tanya Byron's report about technology, that it's all good and to be embraced, but you have to underpin it with proper education about exactly those issues of identity and privacy. There's a massive generational difference in how people see the web, and that's one of the things that I find most interesting and exciting. Not only just between classic generational breakdowns, but much more split and atomized fragments of early 20s to late 20s to mid 20s. It's more about kind of the stage of life you're at as well, I think, and where you are in the education cycle. If I look now at how 8, 9, 10-year-olds use the web, it's completely different to how somebody aged 18 would use it, completely different how I would use it again. And I think that one of the issues around the privacy questions that are now being raised are, have we taught children how to be safe online enough? And are we, aware enough, if we've come at this later with technology, of all the different ways that information is used? So there's definitely a piece of education that needs to underpin all of the developments that are happening in technology.
Most people are unaware of how exposed they've made themselves. You talk to young people, for example, who've got their own personal blog sites or their presence on YouTube or Facebook, and that they may come to regret doing some of the things they did on video, on the internet, or saying the things that they did, especially when they start applying for jobs and employers begin to look back through the digital record of these people, the trace that they've left in the public domain. But quite unaware, every single day that we do something digital, we are potentially leaving a trace out there, and that if somebody wanted to find out where we were shopping, what we were doing, who we were communicating with, why we were doing it, what websites we were logging onto, they could do it. It's a very, very exposed set of media, these electronic communication devices that we now use. And the point is that they're fantastically convenient. None of us would willingly give them up. But what we would want, if we really thought carefully about what it meant whenever we use these devices, we would want much, much greater individual security for our communications.
Well, I think this generation has a sense that information wants to be free and information about themselves wants to be free. And in a way, there's a kind of self-surveillance that I think that young people don't think about in political terms. But it is a political issue. People put their lives on the screen. They put really intimate details of their lives out there, and with very little thought that there might be people using that information in ways that are not benign. I did an interview with a 16-year-old that is precious to me because he talked about how he knows that people, can read his email. He knows that people somehow he senses that his texts are being saved in some server in the sky. But he, when he wants to have a private conversation, he goes to payphones. And he feels that payphones are the only safe place for him to talk. I mean, you have this sense of even young people looking for the interstices of the system to find a little privacy. I don't think this is good. I think that, my grandmother, who came from a European background, taught me how to be a citizen at mailboxes in New York City, where she brought me down to the mailboxes. She said, unlike in Europe, where, bad governments would read your mail and open your mail, in America, it's a federal offense. She's saying it's a federal offense to read somebody else's mail. And that's what makes this country great. That kind of privacy is what gives you rights as a citizen. So in a way, I learned to be a civil libertarian. I learned to be an American at these mailboxes as a kid. I don't know where to take my daughter to teach her that. When we go through the Mass Pike and there's Easy Pass, my car is tracked, there are surveillance cameras all over. We're both giving up unprecedented amounts of information in profiling. I think that it's hard to teach the relationship between privacy and democracy, and it's also hard to teach the relationship between intimacy and privacy. What is intimacy without privacy? I think this is really a question for this generation. This is no longer a generation that lives deliberately, that lives its life, that lives in the moment. I think that has time for reflection. We ask ourselves questions. If the velocity and volume is such that I send you a tweet or I send you a text, you have to answer me back. You can't. Nobody answers a text by saying, I have to think about that for 2 weeks. The communication demands a response. Well, that means that we start to ask each other questions that are easy to answer. And so I think we live in a kind of paradoxical time, and we're giving our teenagers a paradox, or the whole generation, not just our teenagers, but our babies growing up, a very paradoxical message. The world is more and more and more and more complex. On the other hand, we're only going to ask you a question that you can answer in 2 seconds. So we leave ourselves less and less time for reflection because our communications media push us to quick responses. And quite frankly, the questions before our planet right now are not questions that should be answered or thought about in the time space of texting.
Every single time we go online, every time we look at a website, every time we send an email message, every time we make a phone call with our mobile telephones, we're exposing ourselves, we're stripping ourselves naked to the view of anybody who is interested to find out what we're doing. We know already that private agencies are keen to look at the pattern of use of the internet that we indulge in so that they can target advertising at us. And governments in the Western world, indeed in the world at large, are anxious to keep a record of who people are talking to, what kind of information they're finding out, so that they can detect patterns of, that suggest crime or terrorism in the offing. And in all these ways, therefore, we expose ourselves to view through the use of these devices. Not that we would want to give up using these devices, they're just so useful to us, but they do expose us to scrutiny. We should be very worried, I think, about the amount of data concerning ourselves, including very personal, private, intimate data about ourselves, which is now out there in the public domain, both in private and in public hands. We should be worried about it for a large number of reasons, but one central reason is that this information is stored digitally in one or another location out there in a way that we may not have access to ourselves. And it's very, very easily manipulated. It's very easily changed by somebody who is either lazy, incompetent, or malevolent in some way. It's very easy for that information to be shared, and for patterns of information to seem to appear to certain agencies that could put one under suspicion, even if one weren't a suspicious individual. In other words, the prospect for misinformation, for corruption of our personal information, and for mistakes to be made about our personal information is massively increased by the fact that there is so much of it out there and so much of it is collated by different agencies. Inefficiency and patchiness of information is a great protection of personal privacy. And the more efficient the systems are that collect and collate data about us, the more the potential is for mistake and misuse.
When we think about the future and where we go from here, the question is, are we going to change and enter sort of a quantified world where everywhere you've been, everyone you talk to, it's indexed, it's analyzed, it's stored, and it's used maybe against you? Or will we recognize the danger of that and embrace the fact that people should have space to make mistakes without judgment, to have sort of the unconsidered thought or conversation with your friend? But if that was recorded in a database where, you know, now you say, I think Donald Trump should be kicked off a cliff, and Donald Trump becomes president someday, sure, and everybody who said that ends up getting thrown off a cliff. That's a very dangerous world. And I think this really is the question that our political structures are not yet comfortable even discussing. But whether they like it or not, it's a world that's coming and we're going to have to confront.